Hello, my name is Jim Dalglish, and this is my 9/11 story. On September 10th, 2001, my colleagues and I from Boston took a train down to New York, all the way down to the financial district, checked into the Millennium Hotel, which is right across the street from the World Trade Center. We were down in Manhattan to start a project for Standard & Poor's. We were in charge of completely redesigning their website. And the woman who had organized this meeting had gotten people from all over the world, division heads, vice presidents, presidents, to come to Manhattan so that we could begin this project at 9 o'clock in the morning on September 11th, 2001. It was going to be a 6-hour project, and I was in charge of the presentation for the entire 6 hours. I remember when I got down there the day before, I looked out, and it was the first time I'd been so close to the World Trade Center, 29th floor overlooking the plaza, the World Trade Center plaza, and I remember seeing that beautiful globe. And I called my partner Rob and I said, Rob, you have to come down to Manhattan. Let's go after my meeting tomorrow, let's go to the top of the World Trade Center. I've never been there before. And he said that he couldn't, but he would love to. So that morning, September 11th, was very bright. We ate breakfast early at the hotel and then walked to Standard & Poor's, the building which was about 5 blocks from the World Trade Center. And I remember it being very, very bright. You could barely see, and I had left my sunglasses back at the hotel, and I thought I should go back and get them, but we didn't have time. We needed to start this meeting. The meeting at the Standard & Poor's building, like I said before, was 5 blocks away, and it was on the 59th floor in their boardroom. As I was getting ready for the presentation, I had my computer next to the window, and I was frantically getting things ready, and I recall looking up and seeing a piece of paper float by the window. That one corner was singed, and the paper said memorandum across the top. And I looked around, and there were other pieces of paper that were flying all over, in front of my window, in front of the 59th floor. And I thought, what a strange time to be having a ticker tape parade, and why were they using, pieces of stationery instead of ticker tape for the parade, if that's what it was. But then I looked over to my right, and I saw the World Trade Center with the huge rip through it, with the flames and the smoke and the paper, thousands of pieces of paper exploding out of the tear in the building. And I remember picking up my phone and calling Rob and saying, I'm okay. And he said, well, what do you mean? He thought that I'd gone out the night before and gotten into trouble, and I was calling from the jail or something. But I said, turn on the TV, and he turned it on, and we both saw what was going on, me in person and him on the phone, or on the TV. At that point, the woman who organized the meeting from Standard & Poor's said, Jim, we're going to be late with this presentation. We're ready. Could you please begin it? So I went in to the boardroom with all these division heads and vice presidents and presidents, and I started the meeting. About 5 minutes in, there was another explosion, and a woman screamed outside the boardroom and ran past down the hallway in front of the open window, or the open door. And I looked out the window, and the second tower had been hit, and there was a huge rip through that, and flames and paper and debris exploding out of the tear. And I looked closer, and I saw on both towers little things that were falling off the facade of the buildings, and I thought they must be little pieces of the building or something, and I didn't want to look too closely or think about it too much, what exactly that could be falling off the building at that point. The woman who organized the meeting said, okay, Jim, let's continue. So I got back on the podium, and I continued with my conversation, even though everyone's focus was out the window on what was happening. And I said, I don't think I should go on, but the woman said, listen, if we were in danger, they would close the building, so don't worry about it. It's 5 blocks away, we'll be fine. I gathered all these people, and I don't want to waste their time. So I continued for another 10 minutes before the alarms went off, and the PA announcement said, please evacuate the building. At that point, people were putting their stuff away, and this woman said, okay, let's take out our calendars and schedule the next meeting. But they paid no attention to her, and they escaped the room. It took me about 10 minutes to get in the elevator and down, waiting down to the street level. And on the street, at the base of the building, it was like complete chaos with sirens and people looking nervous and milling about and running about. I decided that we should go back to the hotel to pick up our luggage. So we started walking down Wall Street to get to the hotel. And I remember seeing a woman who was crying, and she was dialing her phone over and over again. And we were waiting for, to get across the street. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said her husband works on the top floor of the North Tower, and she couldn't get through. So I convinced my friends that we should just try to get through on our cell phones. So we spent 10 minutes dialing his number, all of us, over and over and over again, trying to get through to his cell phone. But we couldn't get through. And after about 10 minutes, I looked around, and the woman had wandered off into the crowd. About that time, the police came and said that we should clear the area and not go any closer to the World Trade Center. So we began walking down Wall Street. I remembered seeing these huge four-masted schooners at the South Station Seaport in the Battery. And I thought, okay, if we really are being attacked, and they had said, one of the people at Standard & Poor's had said that she had seen an airplane flying to the building, and I assumed it was a little Cessna or something, but she said no, it was a jetliner, and I couldn't imagine a jetliner flying into a building. It was completely unfathomable. But so I thought, if we were under attack, we should get on these huge four-masted schooners, untie them, and push them out into the East River, and we'd be safe. I don't know, I wasn't thinking exactly. So we started walking in that direction, when there was a huge rumble and a kind of explosion, and we looked back, and people were running down Wall Street, and a huge cloud was following them and eventually overtaking them and overtaking us. None of us had any idea what was happening, so at that point we decided that we just needed to walk up the island towards Midtown. And we and about 10,000 other people took to the streets and the sidewalks and made, like lemmings, up the island of Manhattan. I looked over and I saw the Brooklyn Bridge was completely, thousands of people were crossing it. No one was driving, and everyone was walking. And I looked around and saw people covered with dust, completely white or gray, except for little pieces that were red from where debris had hit them from when the towers had collapsed. At that point, I looked over and only could see one tower, so I knew one had collapsed, but I thought it had, kind of fallen over towards Wall Street, and that was the reason for the cloud. As we walked up through the Bowery, through the East Village, towards Washington Square Park. And all the electronic shops had their TVs on, so you could see over and over again the tower as it was standing, and people had their TVs out on the streets so that everyone could see as we were walking up north, up the Isle of Manhattan. We entered Washington Square Park. I saw the one tower. We got a little bit in, we turned a corner around some trees, and I looked again, and it was gone. So I knew both of them had collapsed. We got to my friends at their Midtown. They had an office in Midtown, and they were huddled around a TV watching what was happening. And that was the first time I saw the buildings collapse. They took me in, and we had grabbed some sandwiches and food, and we went down to the Christopher Street docks and to observe what was happening. And I remember sitting on the grass and eating sandwiches and looking at this chaos. And there was a huge rumble and explosion and smoke and dust billowing into the air. And at that point, one of the other towers, the smaller ones, the shorter ones, had collapsed from the debris falling on it. A short distance away, there was a man. He had put out a blanket. He was in a swimsuit because it was a beautiful day. And he had his headphones on, and he was reading a book as he sunbathed. And it was so surreal looking at him sunbathing and then looking beyond him down to Manhattan with all the carnage and chaos going on. Eventually I did get back to Boston. 2 weeks later, when it was clear to go back into Manhattan, the woman who organized the meeting decided it was time to kickstart the process again. So my colleagues and I took another train down to Manhattan and took the subway down to the Wall Street station, When we got out of the station, we looked up, and all the buildings in Manhattan down there in the financial district, in the canyon of the financial district, they were all covered with this fine gray-white dust. And there were a bunch of firemen, fire personnel, and security people and maintenance people, and they had these huge hoses, and they were washing the buildings, the brick and glass buildings downtown, to get the dust off them. And I remember looking up all these dust-covered buildings and how the water would take them, it would make little rivulets, streaming down the buildings, and it was like looking at the buildings cry as we walked through the canyons of Lower Manhattan. 6 months later, I got a phone call from the Millennium Hotel saying that my clothes, which had been in quarantine for 6 months because all of the windows of the Millennium, or most of them, had been blown out, and the rooms were covered with dust, and so they put all of my clothing and luggage and my toiletries in quarantine for 6 months. I went down to the Woolworth building, which is right behind the Millennium, and I remember looking up and seeing, even 6 months later, on all the walls and the fences and any kind of vertical surface were all these "have you seen" posters, "have you seen," and they'd have a name with a photograph. Last seen and worked in the North Tower. Please, if you've seen this person, please call this number, and they would have a phone number. And no one dared touch them. They were like memorials that were there for a year and a half afterward. Later, when I was in the train going back after all this, after 9/11, I started conceptualizing 2 plays. One is a play called Unsafe, about my experiences and the impact of 9/11. And another one was called Professionals, which was a short play that I thought was pretty accurate about what had happened to me that day. And it was performed 4 months after 9/11 in Provincetown. I remember in the performance, at the end, they had a talkback session, and people were actually upset with me for writing a play that took advantage of people's tragedy. How dare I, co-opt that and write a play about it? And but the thing that they were most disturbed about was the main character, who continued on with the meeting when something so horrible was happening on. They said no one in their right mind who had any sense or any grip on reality would continue on a meeting with the 2 World Trade Centers under attack like that, and that was completely unbelievable. And it just kind of reminded me that life is unreal and unbelievable, but I still think about what happened that day and my reaction, and it's haunted me ever since.